You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the biohealth capital region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis, host of BioTalk, and we have an exciting edition today with Christy Wyskiel, who is the senior advisor to the president of Johns Hopkins University, and that's Ron Daniels, for those who don't know who the president is. And we're going to talk about many things. We're going to talk about what's new and different at JHU and their tech transfer and innovation programs, what's going on in East Baltimore, what's happening with the community in Baltimore, and how Johns Hopkins is trying to bring the community together, working together more effectively. And most importantly, we want to learn about Christy first. So Christy, let's hear about Christy's background and how you ended up getting to Johns Hopkins.
Great. Thank you, Rich. I'm so delighted to be here today. I've been at Johns Hopkins for a little over 4 years. President Daniels recruited me from the private sector. I spent most of my career as a Wall Street investor. And so I was investing in public and private companies, mostly in the medical device arena. And I had an epiphany somewhere along the way after I had had a couple of companies succeed from very young idea stage companies to larger commercial stage companies. And I've been in Baltimore almost 20 years, and that epiphany was that I looked around and said, I feel like there really could be critical mass of these types of companies here in Baltimore, given the tremendous research happening throughout the state of Maryland. And so I left my Wall Street business behind and I formed a company really as an angel investor and advisor. And I founded a couple of companies with Johns Hopkins faculty members, researchers. I advised a number of others. I met with over 100 different opportunities throughout the state. And I just have a particular passion for company building, and the life sciences space, I think, is really meaningful in terms of company building and investment. So after starting those two companies, I had some ideas where I thought Hopkins and Baltimore could really build that critical mass. And I shared those ideas with some friends. And it was one of those friends who introduced me to President Daniels.
And then when you met with President Daniels and you had this epiphany, what did you explain to him that resonated? He said, why don't you join us, Christy?
That was a long conversation, Rich. That was, many months in the making. But I think I can boil it down to two major categories. One is that there wasn't the infrastructure that was needed for these companies. And by infrastructure, I'm talking about lab space. I'm talking about resources, connections to investors, legal help. And the second big bucket was that we didn't necessarily have the policies in place and the leadership initiative to enable faculty to do this. And so I whether it was infrastructure or impediments, I said, I really think we can identify and address these, take these head on. And so President Daniels took a risk and hired me. I'd never worked inside academia. I'm a private sector person. And now I have the great honor and pleasure of running the third busiest tech transfer operation in the world.
And you've been here how long now?
Little over 4 years.
4 years. And then you mentioned you're not from academia.
That's right.
Sometimes the transition to academia from industry is a difficult one. So what were the initial challenges you found coming from Wall Street, industry, angel investor, entrepreneur to going into a large multi-billion-dollar organization like Johns Hopkins?
Yeah, so Steve Case, who's a real hero of mine, he also, like me, went to Williams College and, of course, is one of the great tech company builders of our generation. He has an African proverb that he often quotes that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And so I think really embracing that as an attitude was the most important thing that one does when entering a large organization. Johns Hopkins has been around for approximately 150 years. And they'll be here 150 years after I'm gone. They've got a long legacy, and they've got, particularly with the leadership of people like President Daniels, a long and glorious future ahead of them. So I really just look at this as an opportunity to do some good while I'm here in the face of just this incredible legacy from all the way from Johns Hopkins University to Johns Hopkins Medicine, which is about where 80% or so of our inventions and our companies come from, out of the School of Medicine. So I think to answer that directly, it was just the pace is quite different. There's a lot of consensus building. And one of the first things we did, Rich, was look at great models in other ecosystems. So rather than me coming in with a plan, what we did is put a committee together of faculty and students from across all 9 schools of the university. We included students with that. Most of these folks were very entrepreneurially minded and had some experience. And we went around the country and we looked at great models, mostly in and around university ecosystems. What were university ecosystems doing well, and how were the universities participating in that? We looked at those findings. We came back and took a hard look at ourselves and came out with what we call the Innovation Report in 2014 that really established those 22 recommendations that we have stuck to and had formed our strategic plan from the beginning. So the answer to private sector to academia, it's really about consensus building, establishing the plan, getting buy-in to the plan, and making sure that you understand who your stakeholders are and how you can serve them.
And I think really in the 4 years you've been here, there's been a major paradigm shift in the way that Johns Hopkins does innovation and tech transfer. And you had 22 recommendations. If you were to narrow those down to the major areas of reinvention that you brought to Johns Hopkins, what would you classify those major things as?
We categorize them broadly in 4 big buckets of needs for the entrepreneur and the ecosystem. One was policy and matters of helping faculty researchers understand the process. And the other 3 were really space, resources, and funding. And the space we've talked about, that's having affordable and flexible lab space. And we've put that into play right here at 1812 Ashland, where we're sitting. We have 17,000 square feet of lab and office for startups with shared equipment. That's affordable, very flexible terms. You don't have to sign a 5-year lease here. So we put that in place. As far as the bucket of services, and that includes finding talent and sourcing talent, that includes educational training, that includes mentors, which we have 15 mentors in residence. That includes our I-Corps program, which we do with the University of Maryland and others. So a number of resources to help the entrepreneur. And then funding, and that's everything from grant funding that we help facilitate from the state of Maryland to philanthropic funding that serves as grants for translational funding to and through connections to institutional investors and venture investors. And so those are the broad pieces. And, I'm proud to say that the vast majority of those recommendations, the box has not only been checked, but I think we're really flourishing in terms of seeing the output.
And you talk about the output. I had a chance to look at the 2017, I think you called Tech Ventures, JHU Tech Ventures Year in Review. And there's been some pretty neat accomplishments that happened just in the past year, but over the 4 years since you've been here. Do you want to highlight some of those major accomplishments?
Sure. So, yes, we established right about in late 2014, as we were kicking off our planning process, we established the group that I now have the great privilege of leading, called Johns Hopkins Technology Ventures, and that encompasses our tech transfer organization, our corporate partnership organization, and Fast Forward, which is our innovation hub. And so, as far as accomplishments go, it's all about what the team has been able to deliver. I think building an incredible team here, it will be the lasting accomplishment and legacy of what we've done. And in that time, the team has managed to help start about 20 new companies a year. We've raised over $1 billion in venture capital for companies. We have seen the shift, and I think one of the things I'm most proud of, the shift of about 80% of the capital getting invested leaving Maryland to about 50% leaving or staying in that case. So a dramatic shift in terms of having companies stay regionally, being able to raise substantial dollars. And, the one that I would like to highlight that I've recently heard the CEO speak, and I was really just blown away with the progress, is a company called Personal Genome Diagnostics. They're based right here in the waterfront in Baltimore in the area called Canton. They, just a couple of years ago, had 50 employees. As of last week, they had 250 employees. They just closed a $75 million venture round New Enterprise Associates is the lead investor in the last couple of rounds there. And they have a very unique cancer test that came out of the lab of a number of our preeminent cancer researchers. So I think to me, that is an example of what good looks like. That is the seeds of a company that I think will be wildly successful in the future. And it really shows that we're making meaningful change. We're bringing meaningful products to market. It's not another social media app that's going to get an 11-year-old addicted to social media like my kids. It's going to be something that meaningfully changes people's lives for the better. And we're very proud of the role that we play in that aspect.
So Johns Hopkins has been doing great research in science for a long time. What do you think has changed in the last 4 or 5 years to where people are spending more time focusing on these opportunities? They're not leaving Baltimore to go to Boston or San Francisco as frequently, even though we're still losing some. But what's been the transformation to where there's been these successes that you're talking about right in our own backyard here?
Yeah, so Rich, I think it's a couple of things. First of all, you're correct. For actually 38 years in a row, the data just came out, 38 years in a row, Johns Hopkins has been the number one recipient of competitive grants from the federal government and others. And it's really remarkable that we could sustain for such a long period of time that level of funding. And I think just shows the caliber of our research and our efforts and our leadership. I think what has changed is that there was always a strong organic interest throughout the faculty and student population in translating their ideas to products. What was missing, as I said, was the infrastructure. And what has changed in the last 4 years is that leadership has gone all in. So there is incredible amount of leadership support, whether it is President Daniels, the Dean of the Medical School, Dean Rothman, the Dean of the Engineering School, Ed Schlesinger, many others in leadership roles who have said this is important for a number of reasons, not the least of which is retaining and recruiting the right caliber of faculty and students. They're demanding that in this day and age, and the impact that this can have. And so I think the fact that there was pent-up demand, so to speak, and then leadership effort, the reason that you're seeing the transition, so that's the activity barometer. The reason you're seeing more and more of that stay in Baltimore is that we now have those services locally. So if you apply to Fast Forward here in Baltimore and are accepted, you get access to free legal hours. We have an accountant who is a sponsor who can help you set up the books for the company. We have someone who works full-time on talent coordination and trying to identify individuals to lead and work at these companies. And we have a full-time venture director who helps connect our faculty and companies to high-caliber venture investors. And so I think all of that full suite of services, not the least of which is the space, but it also includes these other attributes, has been a key part of retaining these companies locally.
It's really creating this entrepreneurial ecosystem everybody talks about, but it's really hard to invent, really. I mean, it's really from the grassroots, but I remember also it takes the top-down support. And when you were putting your innovation report together in 2014, that had to go to the Board of Trustees for approval, if I'm not mistaken. And they had to approve a major bet for the future of what was going to be produced out of this new design for innovation and tech transfer, and you've had that full support to do what you're doing.
Yeah, I think the board has been incredibly supportive. There are a number of our board members who continue to help us source connections to talent and investors. But I think part of the reason for that is that many of our trustees work in the business world. Many are successful biotech executives, pharma executives. They work in the venture world. They are entrepreneurs themselves, many of them. And so I think there's a real interest and understanding in value creation and company creation, and they have been just really strong advisors to my team and to me as we have built this function.
And if you produce outcomes, it's easier to get people who are professionals in the business industry to understand that the investment is a good investment if there's production that comes out the other side.
So that's right. And we've had a couple of recent exits. So we had a company called Kala Pharmaceuticals that's based in Boston. Their focus is drug delivery, and they went public last July. We had a cancer company that actually sold to MedImmune a couple of years ago. So we know what good looks like. We've had exits. We have a cardiology company called Cardioxyl that was sold to Bristol Myers that has a drug in phase 2 trials for heart failure. So we're continuing to try to build that momentum. I think the difficult thing, if there is something that is the most hand-wringing part of what we do, it's that because so much of our activity is in the life sciences, that does take a long time to germinate, right? And so if you are talking about having exits and building companies, these companies that I just spoke about were founded over 10 years ago. So it's planting seeds now that we hope will grow over time and become something real, but it's important that we take the long-term view with all of these things.
And that requires patience and persistence. And so I know you're very persistent. Sometimes patience, I don't know if either one of us has all of the patience we need sometimes, Christy, but that's something that we're learning. The older I get, the more patient I become, I think. But at the same time, we know that there's gaps we still need to address. There's been significant progress, but there are things that we still need to focus on to make it a complete ecosystem. And maybe to keep most of the things here rather than still losing some. And that's not just in Baltimore, it's throughout the whole ecosystem we're talking about. So what are some of those areas that you still need to be addressed related to gaps, resources, funding, people, networks that we still need to address?
Yeah, and Rich, you and I have spoken about this because I think this is true throughout the region. We don't have as many exited entrepreneurs who can take up and lead the next company as other regions do. So while you may be able to walk in any Starbucks in Silicon Valley or Boston and find someone who's worked at a company that went public or was sold, we don't have as many, we just don't have the critical mass of that type of talent. So we often have to import them or train them. Those are our options. And so really focusing in and honing in on talent that wants to take risks, that understands how to be a successful entrepreneur, that understands how to build teams and companies and meet business milestones. That's one area. The second, I think we have done, I've really got to give my team credit. They have done a remarkable job attracting critical masses of venture investments. What that means, though, is that the venture community often wants to see the asset at a certain stage. So how do you get it to that stage? So whether it's philanthropic dollars or early seed stage investment capital, in order to get the asset, whether it's a life sciences or a non-life sciences asset, to the point where it is investable, that remains a challenge. And that's hard in all regions, actually. That's not unique to Maryland.
So I think I've been here almost 7 years now and had a chance to interact with Hopkins during that whole time. And one of the initial perceptions was it was sort of an island until itself. There wasn't as much outreach, and if you wanted to deal with Hopkins, you came to Hopkins. It didn't come to you, for example. But I think what's happened in the transformation over the last 4 to 5 years, Christy, and a lot of this is attributable to you, is the importance of trying to have collaborative partnerships with people, outreaching to find ways that you can leverage assets that are very precious and we don't have an excess of, finding a way to leverage those dollars and those people to bring greater return on investment with the limited assets we've had. So what do you think about what the need is, and what do you see as some of the positive signs for collaboration and partnerships that are beginning to emerge now?
Yeah, I take this very seriously. In fact, I pride myself on the no silos rule. I just don't think it's necessarily productive to have folks building things in parallel when they could really be building the interconnectedness. In fact, I was surprised a couple of years ago. My friends at Betamore handed out something called the Silo Breaker Award, and I got that. I didn't even know such award existed, but it's probably the most meaningful award that I've received in my career, simply because it showed that I really was taking a no tolerance approach when it comes to a zero tolerance approach when it comes to silos. And so whether it is reaching out to the folks at Betamore, to City Garage, at Spark, at Impact Hub, whether it's reaching across town and working with my colleagues at the University of Maryland, working with people in government like TEDCO and the Department of Commerce and others, I really do think it's important that we're all trying to row the boat in the same direction. And if we can get in the boat, figure out our navigation and start rowing together, we're a lot likely to go farther than being in individual kayaks. And I continue to remain dedicated to that. I think the most recent manifestation to that is a grant that we applied for with our friends at the University of Maryland through TEDCO called Anchor Ventures. And what that does is similar to the Venture Cafe model in Boston that brings together once a month, I believe it's on the third Thursdays once a month, brings together a community of entrepreneurs and investors around an interesting topic and speaker. The first one we had that was moderated by George Davis, who runs TEDCO now, was Steve Case, who I mentioned before. And it was a great turnout. It was a great event. Steve actually met prior to the event with some local entrepreneurs. And Steve, of course, himself has been an advocate for investing in regions that are not Massachusetts and California, and probably has done more to raise the visibility than anyone else on that front.
Congratulations on Anchor Ventures. I think more of those types of initiatives are needed within this region. But also, in addition to these partnerships you've been forming, Johns Hopkins is critical as a leader in the biohealth and life science industry in the state, the country, globally. And there's been some recent initiatives which you've been engaged with. One is Governor Hogan appointed a life science advisory board of people to come together from academia, industry, the federal government to find ways to get recommendations for what the state needs to do to become more progressive within this industry, which is critical to it. In addition, he also created an Excel board, which is, I guess, looking to develop a more of a master economic development plan and strategy for the state of Maryland. Give me your feelings related to these initiatives, which Hopkins is extremely important to since it's such an anchor to the whole industry within the state of Maryland.
Sure. And Rich, of course, thank you for your service as well on the Life Science Advisory Board. It takes a village, and of course, you've been part of that, a key part of that. I think all of these are really important strategic moments for us as a state. I think recognizing that we are a leader in federal research dollars and recognizing that we have a moment and the ability to leverage those federal dollars into meaningful impact in terms of new jobs, new economic opportunity throughout the state. I think our current governor understands that. I think that our current legislature understands that. I think the business community is all in as well. And so I think to tie all of those pieces together really in the model of what some other regions have done and place a big bet, make a bet that we want to continue to grow, and we want to continue to grow based on the assets we have here in the state. Rich, I think you know that the state of Massachusetts made $1 billion bet just on life sciences, and that includes some capital build-out, some programming, some funding, a number of training initiatives, for example, to move talented workers into jobs. And so I think we are trying to look at those best practices and trying to identify how to do that. The Excel initiative, which is co-chaired by Chancellor Corrett at the University System of Maryland and by President Daniels of Johns Hopkins, is working very closely with the governor's office and other business leaders to come up with that plan. But I have great hope that we will be able to realize our strengths as a region and really turn that into jobs and opportunity.
If you had a magic wand and you could ask the governor for one thing, but if he serves a second term, because we realize it takes time and patience, what is that one major ask you would have from state leadership, recognizing it takes industry, academia, and the state all working together, and the state can't do it by itself? But the state can be a catalyst. What is that one thing you'd have for a major ask for him?
Well, my ask really already came true, Rich. My ask was to gather a group in something that looks a lot like Excel Maryland and to tackle these issues and to put some real funding behind it. So I think the goal at this point is to try to really get buy-in from across the state government, across industry, across the anchor institutions to say this is an area where we want to invest. And I'm hoping that as this plan comes together, that we can have some concrete investment moments to really build this ecosystem.
And we all talked for a long time about the lack of capital, access to capital. and you mentioned how your team has helped import more, and you actually had some major successes recently. Why don't you tell the listeners about the Deerfield relationship that's evolved and a recent investment that they've made?
Sure. So I have a fundamental belief, and this just stems from the fact that I spent many years of my career as an investor, and that belief is that capital is mobile, and the money will find the good ideas. Now, it takes a little bit more flag waving and self-promotion to get the capital to find the good ideas if you're in a region where there's not a venture investor on every corner. But I do believe if you can build a good company and put a great team in place, and the science is strong and the intellectual property is also strong, that the capital will find you. And I think we're seeing that play out. The missing link was really the connections, and really just the sense that we want to be the most investor-friendly and industry-friendly tech transfer office in the world. That's one of our goals. And so the more we can do to have these relationships, to build meaningful relationships where venture investors will come and invest time after time after time at Johns Hopkins, that's what we wanted to do. In the case of Deerfield, they are a preeminent healthcare investment firm. Historically, they have been investing in public companies. They have deep knowledge in many therapeutic areas, from cancer to neurology and beyond. And they were quite interested in moving upstream. So that is to say, moving to earlier stages of investing. They had already consummated a couple of economic partnerships with universities, academic collaborations with universities. And they approached us. We actually have an alum who's at Deerfield who is very interested in helping with that relationship. And we came up with a plan where our scientists could really benefit from not only their capital, but their expertise in understanding business milestones and commercial relevance and how to build companies. And so we formed our relationship with them. As far as recent successes, there's one company that comes to mind that was funded actually outside of the official Deerfield Hopkins relationship. It was introduced to them sort of in parallel, called Drayson Pharmaceuticals, founded by a couple world-renowned clinician scientists here at Johns Hopkins. And Drayson has a prodrug focused on oncology and is making great progress. And I think Deerfield saw that progress. So again, just one of the many companies that we're so proud to say have emerged from the labs at Johns Hopkins.
And the meaning thing about that investment, Christy, is I think it's $40 million. That's the type of investment you see in Boston and Silicon Valley every day. That size of investment is something we generally don't see in this region, and that's, I think, another milestone to see more of those major Series A investments starting to occur here.
Yeah, I mean, we talked earlier about Personal Genome Diagnostics. They raised $75 million, and I think over the course of the next 6 to 12 months, you'll see a number of other companies that are raising 20, 30, 40 million each. So yes, I think we've been building these venture relationships. We've been helping the faculty really think about the business opportunities. And I think what you will see over the course of the next 1 to 2 years is further evidence of success that we have real investable assets.
And we're speaking with Christy Wyskiel, Senior Advisor to the President of Johns Hopkins University. And I want to talk about two things before we close, Christy. One is regionalization. And we know that most of your assets and resources are located within Baltimore City, here with the hospital and the university. You do have some things outside of Montgomery County with a campus, as well as APL in Prince George's County. But the major focus has been really here within the city. But recently, I think President Daniels, as well as yourself, recognized the importance of regionalization. And he became a founding partner of the Greater Washington Partnership, which is really, I think, we'll all look for what the ultimate mission is and the goal of that organization, but it's to get greater collaboration between Richmond to Baltimore. How do you feel about regionalization and the importance of that contributing to your success?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of a catch-22 in some sense, because in regions that have had great success, you do see a concentration of assets. You see innovation districts form where entrepreneurs and investors can collide, where partners can easily access multiple companies and assets, where there is a real sense of place and geography. And this is in many regions. This is not just Boston and San Diego and San Francisco. This is in Austin and Pittsburgh and Georgia and St. Louis and other places. And I think that is going to continue to be one of the biggest challenges in Maryland. Rich, you often joke that the longest 30 miles in the country is between Montgomery County and Baltimore. Luckily, thanks to the intercounty connector highway, it's no longer the case. I can get door to door in less than an hour from Baltimore City, so it's much more predictable. But I do think that until we're really willing to be thoughtful about concentration of assets and where we're going to build these innovation districts, then we're going to continue to not have that as an asset that we otherwise could have.
I agree. Once we can find a way to eliminate the artificial boundaries, whether they be geographical, political boundaries, we won't function effectively as an integrated ecosystem. But I think there have been major steps to bring some of those elements together, especially, now we're branding the biohealth capital region, which is Virginia, D.C., and the state of Maryland. But honestly, we know that in the life science and the biohealth industry, the highest concentration of those assets reside within the Maryland area. So at the end of the day, I understand how difficult it is to 100% embrace regionalization because everybody marches to the beat of their own masters, their own funders, their own boards that they have to. But I think ultimately some of the steps you've taken recently with the outreach and the collaboration and the partnerships is going to add to the enhancement of that region in the future. So I congratulate you on that. Let's talk about the goals for you in the future. What do you see as your now major challenges for the next 5 years, and with the significant progress you've made in the last 4 to 5, where can this really end up?
Sure. I think it will continue to be all about capital and human capital. And we've got to continue to move at the pace of industry and at the pace that investors want to see. And that is continuing to bring great people into Johns Hopkins Tech Ventures. That's continuing to bring great people in to run our companies. That's helping to transition and educate the folks who are getting PhDs here at Johns Hopkins, or undergrads who are interested in learning more and being part of the innovation world, and helping them understand how they can have impact. I'm a big fan of a group called Venture for America. It's like Teach for America. You spend 2 years after having a very strong college record that shows you can really have some entrepreneurial flair to your life. You spend 2 years in a region that is trying to build entrepreneurial talent. I understand Baltimore is one of the largest Venture for America regions. And so that's just an example of ways that are not in my day-to-day job, but that I wholly support as really building the human capital. And then on the capital front, it's everything from continuing to build out our services here, to working with partners, to helping our companies access various forms of capital. We don't want to lose the momentum, and there's no reason that we would right now. But I think we have laid out the plan, and I think as opposed to building the plane a bit as we flew, maybe in the first couple of years, I think now we're ready to really soar and take advantage of that momentum.
Last thoughts. Anything we haven't discussed, and you have an open mic that you can basically discuss anything you'd like to share with our listeners.
Look, I'm just really grateful that the faculty and students here at Johns Hopkins have embraced the mission that we're doing. I feel like I have the greatest job in the world. I'm really truly the luckiest person in the world. I get to interact with people who are changing lives every day, who are doing everything from helping with the technology and Amazon Alexa's product with speech recognition, to cancer immunotherapy, to new types of robots that help manufacturers be more efficient, and really everything in between. And to get to spend my time with some of the most brilliant and dedicated minds of our time, and watch over a franchise that is so central to bringing those products to market, I just feel is a great honor and privilege, and I just hope I do right by it in my tenure here.
Well, I think you've done well so far, Christy, and it will only improve in the future. But I want to thank Christy Wyskiel, Senior Advisor to the President, Johns Hopkins University, for appearing on BioTalk today. I also want to thank Johns Hopkins for being a founding partner of BioHealth Innovation, which they have been supportive of for the last 6 years. With President Daniel and Christy's support, I think your support has helped us be a better partner to other people within this region as well. So thank you very much for what you've done to help support BioHealth Innovation. With that, we're going to close this edition of BioTalk and thank Christy once again, and tune in the future for our discussions with other leaders within the BioHealth Capital Region.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.